The Walter Briggs tapes, What Lives in the Woods. When Walter stepped into the woods that night, he wasn't chasing shadows anymore. He wanted answers. The air was thick, humming like a machine buried under the earth. His flashlight flickered across something half sunk in the dirt. Metal, rusted, pulsing faintly. And then, movement. A hand slid out from the hollow, pale and trembling, followed by a face that shouldn't have been alive. Walter's camera shook as more figures stepped into the light, faces the whole town had seen on missing posters. The hum grew louder, twisting through his voice recorder until it replayed his own words. "If you're real, let's finish this." And when the screen cut to static, everyone who watched swore they saw Walter's reflection staring back. But it wasn't his face anymore. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us until the end, and if this mystery moves you, share your thoughts in the comments and pass it along to a friend. The man's name was Walter Briggs. 70 years old, bones stiff from the cold. A man who'd built his own cabin long before the town ever had power lines running through it. His place sat alone, on the edge of a thick belt of woods that locals rarely entered. The kind of forest that looked calm in daylight but turned wrong after sunset. Walter never thought much about it. The woods were part of his life. He split logs out back every morning, fed the stray cats that came wandering from the trees, and sipped black coffee while watching the mist crawl along the tree line. It was peaceful, lonely, sure, but peaceful, until the night he heard it. It wasn't a loud noise, not at first. Just footsteps. Slow, heavy, dragging across the leaves. The kind of sound you don't expect at 2 a.m., when even the wind has gone to sleep. He lay still, thinking maybe it was a deer. Maybe, but then the steps stopped. Right behind his shed. The next morning, he found the ground disturbed. Large, oval-shaped imprints sunk deep into the mud. Not like boots, not like animal prints either. He crouched down, touched one of them, and frowned. The shape looked too long, too stretched. He tried to laugh it off. Old age makes your mind do tricks, right? That's what he told himself. He muttered, probably raccoons messing around, and went on with his chores. But something changed that week. Every night after midnight, the woods felt heavier. Still, like something in there was awake, watching. Even the crickets stopped singing when he stepped outside. By the third night, Walter stopped sleeping. He just sat by his window, with his old hunting flashlight resting on his lap. Then came the scratching. 6 long marks carved across the glass of his kitchen window. Deep enough that when he ran his finger across them, he could feel where the glass had flaked off. That one got to him. He stood there for nearly a minute, just breathing, before whispering, "That's not no raccoon." He told no one, not his neighbor Frank, not even the mailman who passed once a week. But people noticed. One morning, Frank leaned over the fence while Walter was chopping firewood. "Hey, Walt, you good old-timer? You've been looking like you seen a ghost lately." Walter just grunted. "Ain't nothing, Frank. Wood's been noisy, that's all," Frank chuckled. Yeah, that's what old Earl said before he moved out of here. Swore something was walking behind his trailer every night." Walter froze mid-swing. "What'd you say?" Frank shrugged. You know Earl, always talking nonsense. Said he caught something on his camera once. Never showed nobody, though." That stayed in Walter's head, long after Frank walked away. That night, Walter brought out his old camera, the kind with a small red light that blinked every few seconds. He set it up behind his cabin, facing the woods, right where the prints had appeared. He didn't sleep that night either. Just sat inside, every creak of the floor sounding louder than usual, every shadow in the trees looking darker. When morning came, he grabbed his camera, hands trembling slightly from the cold. The battery had died halfway through the night, but he rewound the footage anyway. At first, it was nothing. Just still trees and silence, but near the end, just before the recording cut out, something moved. A tall, blurred shape crossed between the trees. No sound. No face. Just the faint outline of something too tall to be human. Walter stared at the paused frame for a long time. Then he leaned back, exhaled through his nose, and muttered, "Well, damn." He didn't show anyone. Didn't even tell Frank. Instead, he cleaned his rifle for the first time in years and started locking every door twice. That night, he sat by the window again. But this time, the woods were silent. Too silent. Not even the wind moved. He felt something shift in his gut, that strange instinct that tells you when you're not alone. Then, from deep in the woods, one faint click, almost like a camera turning on, and Walter realized maybe he wasn't the only one watching anymore. After that blurred shape on the camera, Walter slept even less. Not because he wanted to keep watch, exactly. More because sleep felt dangerous, like closing your eyes on purpose when something was already peeking in. He learned the cadence of the woods at night, the fox's cough, the owl's low complaint, the wind slipping through birch like a sheet. That cadence changed. Little things arrived that weren't there before. A pause where a bird's call should have been, a twig that clicked under no animal's weight. Small absences, and they added up. He began hearing the sounds in daylight, too. Not loud, not dramatic, just wrong. A soft dragging as if someone had been pulling something heavy through dry leaves. A distant scrape like fingernails against bark. An occasional light tapping. Not regular enough to be a woodpecker, not random enough to be wind. Once, while stacking kindling, Walter froze mid-reach when a faint metallic click echoed from the tree line. He looked up, heart pinprick fast, waited. Nothing. He swallowed. He muttered to himself. Must be the fence post, he said, though the fence post had been fine for decades. Word spread, as small towns do, not through fancy alerts but through coffee shop murmurs and whispered corners of the feed store. Frank dropped by one afternoon, leaned with both elbows on the porch railing, and squinted at Walter like he'd seen something in his eyes. "You still got that camera, Walt?" Frank asked, like it was a joke but also not. He wiped his hands on his shirt, left a thin smear of grease on the fabric. Walter nodded slowly, right where it was. Battery died again. Must be the cold. Frank made a small sound. A half laugh, half sigh. "You sure you want to keep fussin' with that? Folks'll start talkin'." He paused, then added, low. "Earl got out of here quick after saying something saw him. Got all sorts of weird talk after that." There it was, that now familiar ripple of gossip. A neighbor at the post office leaned in, said, "You heard Walter's been up all night?" "Saw something on his camera." Another shook her head. "That old woods got stories." And someone else, a teenage cashier, rolled her eyes. "It's probably just animals, right?" People actin' dramatic. The noise of opinions clustered like birds, all landing on different branches of the same bare tree. Those murmurs did something to Walter. Part of him wanted to laugh it off with them, to shrug, say, "Old man's nerves." But there was also the other part, a stubborn wire of pride and fear that tightened every time someone mentioned cameras and sightings and Earl. He remembered Earl's empty porch, the trailing curtains in a moved-out trailer, the way people had stopped leaving bowls of stew at the edge of his property. People took warnings seriously, quietly. At night the sounds grew a hair closer. The dragging moved around his shed. Once, something brushed the side of his roof, a soft, sliding whisper that made the hairs on his forearm lift. He padded to the window and watched through the glass, breath fogging the pane. The tree line was a dark, unbroken wall. The shadows pooled like ink. For a long time there was only the slow tick of his old clock and the slow beat of his pulse in his ears. Then came voices, not full words, more like syllables, low and breathy, as if two people, or two things, were testing the air. Walter heard the cadence, a drawn-out hiss, a short inhale, a half-formed sound, and then silence. He imagined them whispering his name. He told himself he was imagining it. But his knees shook when he stood. He started making small changes. He left a light on in the kitchen all night, because light felt like an argument with the dark. He put a bell by the back door, the old kind that jingled when opened, and checked it each morning. One dawn, the bell lay on the step, its chain intact but the tiny clapper missing. He turned it over in his hands, felt the cool metal, smelled faintly of wet earth clinging to it. Whoever, whatever, had been there took nothing valuable. Just small things that made a man feel watched, the way you feel watched in a grocery aisle when someone stares too long. Neighbors started watching him watch. Folks would stand a bit too long by their hedges and pretend to check their mail, but wink at each other when Walter walked past and muttered, "Old Walt's been seeing things." A woman from church, Miss Lena, paused at the door one Sunday and said softly, "You be careful now." Another neighbor, Tom, smirked. "He's always liked a mystery," then lowered his voice. "But maybe not this kind." There was a new item on the county bulletin board. A sheriff's deputy had made rounds to 3 homes along the ridge after someone, no one would say who, mentioned a camera and a strange set of prints. The deputy was polite, asked about pets, about traps, about people camping. He wrote notes. He smiled. He left. No one wanted to press him. The law, like the forest, worked slowly. Walter found himself listening differently during the day, too. He noticed the smell of wet leaves after rain, sharper now. He noticed the small ways his porch creaked at noon. He noticed the exact place the sun hit his kitchen table when it was 3 in the afternoon. He learned how to hold his breath. Not all of it was fear. Some of it was the old, useful caution of a man who'd spent a life shaping wood. Measure twice, cut once. He began to prepare. More batteries, extra rope, fresh oil for his rifle. Not for hunting, he told himself, for knowing. One evening, after a conversation at the feed store where 2 older women compared the scrape marks on Walter's window to something they'd seen years ago, Walter returned to his porch and sat down with his hands wrapped around a mug of tea. He closed his eyes. He inhaled the bitter steam. He could still hear, out past the fence, the faint rubbing of something moving in the dark. The sound was patient, deliberate. It didn't hurry. It kept to itself, like a thing that has lived long and learned how to wait. He found himself whispering into the steam. "All right, then. Show yourself." His voice cracked, rusty from disuse. He did not expect an answer. The woods answered, in a slow, distant way. A single, small, hollow sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been the wind. Walter did not move. He warmed his hands on the mug until they lost the tremble of cold and kept the tremble of something else. Anticipation, perhaps, or resignation. He resolved then, quietly, and like a man setting down his tools, he would not be the sort of fellow who walked away. He would see this through. He'd find out what made the dragging sound, who left the prints, what took the bell clapper. That night he set 2 cameras, one on a tripod by the shed, one higher on a branch, wired to a fresh battery pack. He closed his house up, turned on the lights, and sat in the armchair with his rifle across his knees and listened. The woods breathed. The clock ticked. And somewhere among the trees, something listened back. Walter's cabin had always been a kind of time capsule. Old wood, creaky floors, a calendar still pinned to 2009. But by the 3rd week, it felt more like a bunker. Each night he would sit in that same armchair, eyes glued to the window, waiting for proof that he wasn't losing his mind. He had both cameras running now, one by the shed, one hidden up in the maple tree. He checked them every morning like a ritual. Most days there was nothing but fog, moving like pale smoke between trunks. But on the 4th morning, when he loaded the first memory card into his laptop, the footage made his throat go dry. At exactly 2:47 a.m., something moved in the corner of the frame, just for half a second. A flicker of shape that wasn't there before. Not an animal. Not quite human either. Tall, yes, but stretched wrong. The camera's infrared picked up a shimmer, like heat bending air. The outline had shoulders, and something like arms, but no head Walter could make out. He rewound, paused, squinted. The thing didn't walk. It slid. Like each movement erased the one before it. He leaned back, whispering to himself, "Oh Lord, what the hell are you?" Walter sat there, the hum of the laptop fan filling the room, his heart thudding slow and heavy. He saved the clip, copied it twice, labeled it footage_01. He wasn't sure who he'd ever show it to. Later that afternoon, Frank came knocking again. "Hey, Walt," he called through the screen door. "Heard some kids saying you caught something weird on video?" Walter frowned, stepping onto the porch. "Kids talk too much," Frank chuckled. "You know how folks are. One story spreads, and suddenly you're the star of the show. People at the diner say you're seeing ghosts." "Huh." Walter didn't laugh. "Ain't no ghosts, Frank." "Then what is it?" Walter hesitated. He could tell the truth, or keep it buried. Instead, he said quietly, just something in the trees. Frank stared at him for a moment. "Walt, maybe get some rest, yeah?" "You look beat." Walter nodded, but inside, something was unraveling, because Frank's visit wasn't the only strange thing that day. When Walter went to check the second camera, the one up in the maple, the battery pack was gone. Not dead. Gone. The cable had been pulled out cleanly, like someone knew what they were doing. He searched the ground, muttering under his breath, "Come on, come on!" But there was nothing. No cable, no pack, no sign. Only a fresh set of prints leading away from the tree, deeper into the woods. That night, the forest was louder. The dragging noise returned, circling the cabin like a slow orbit. Leaves rustled in tight spirals, as if something were pacing, marking territory. Walter gripped his rifle tighter. Every second felt longer than the last. He whispered, "All right, show me again." "Come on." The dragging stopped. The woods fell dead silent. Then, a faint click. The sound came from behind the shed, the exact same sound the old camera made when starting to record. Walter's stomach dropped. He stood, crept to the back door, opened it just enough to see through the crack. A dim glow flickered between the trees, red, like a recording light. He exhaled shakily. No way. The beam vanished. The woods swallowed it. He stepped out onto the porch, the night air pressing cold against his skin. The ground smelled of damp earth and metal. The moon was a thin white blade behind drifting clouds. That's when he saw movement, faint, near the maple. Something crouched low, its limbs long and uneven. Walter froze, his breath snagging halfway up his chest. The thing tilted, like it was looking back, and then it raised a small metallic object. The reflection hit his eyes. A camera lens. Walter stumbled backward, his hand tightening around the rifle. The red light blinked once, twice, then darkness again. He didn't fire, didn't move, just stood there in silence until his body reminded him to breathe. When he finally did, the air felt thinner, like the world around him had been replaced by a copy that didn't quite fit right. Inside, he locked the door, shut the blinds, and tried to calm his shaking hands. The faint smell of ozone lingered on his clothes, the kind that comes after lightning, though the sky had been clear all night. The next morning, he walked into town for the first time in weeks. He needed to see people, to remind himself that the world still existed beyond the tree line. But people looked at him differently now. The cashier paused mid-scan, the postman's smile was too polite, and Frank's truck wasn't in its usual spot. Two old men at the diner whispered as he passed. "That Briggs fella, yeah, said he caught something on camera again." "Uh-huh. You think he's losing it? Or maybe he's not." Walter didn't stay long. He left his coffee untouched. That night, when he got home, both cameras were waiting for him, on his porch. Cleaned, battery packs reattached, the lenses polished, spotless, and taped to one of them was a note, written in jagged handwriting. "Stop filming US." The handwriting wasn't human. The letters were stretched, warped, like someone who had seen writing but didn't quite understand it. Walter stood there for a long while, the wind brushing against his face, the paper trembling in his hand. Then he turned toward the woods, whispering like a man speaking to a grave. "Us?" And somewhere deep between the trees, the red recording light blinked once, then vanished again. The note sat on the table all day. Walter kept staring at it like it might rearrange itself into something that made sense. The longer he looked, the more wrong it seemed. The ink shimmered faintly when the light hit it, almost alive. By sunset, he'd made up his mind. If they wanted him to stop filming, he'd give them one last night. One last chance to show themselves. Then he'd know if he was crazy, or if something else was really out there. He spent hours setting up, every window, every corner, covered by an old camera or a motion sensor he'd rigged himself. The shed, the tree line, even the back path where the tracks had first appeared. He had his rifle, a lantern, and a half-empty thermos of black coffee. At 10:17 p.m., the forest fell quiet. No crickets, no wind, just the hum of the electric lantern. Walter sat by the window, eyes fixed on the darkness. He'd done this before, back in his hunting days, waiting for deer at dawn. But this was different. This wasn't patience. It was dread pretending to be discipline. Midnight came. Nothing. 1 a.m. came. Nothing. At 2:04, the motion alarm at the shed went off. A sharp ping echoed through the cabin. Walter grabbed the rifle and peered through the blinds. The light over the shed flickered, once, twice, then steadied. The air seemed thicker, like a storm was about to break. He whispered, "All right, come on then." The camera near the shed clicked on automatically, recording. Through the viewfinder, he could just make out a shape standing by the old wheelbarrow. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching the house. Then another shape appeared beside it. Then another. 3 silhouettes now, tall, still, wrong. He couldn't make out their faces, if they even had any. The air shimmered around them like heat on asphalt. The middle figure moved first, slow and deliberate. It turned its head, or what passed for one, toward the camera, and then, one by one, the others followed. The red recording light blinked once, and they all blinked with it. Walter stumbled back from the window, heart slamming in his chest. The sound outside changed, not footsteps, but a kind of dragging whisper, like dry leaves being pulled through a tunnel. He whispered to himself, "Don't panic, don't panic." He turned to his laptop, pulling up the live feed, only static. Every camera had gone dead, one by one. The screens flickered, showing half-second glimpses of the woods and something else. Not trees anymore, not sky, just black, with faint outlines moving like ink underwater. The power flickered, then held. The knocking started next. 3 soft raps on the front door, then silence. Walter raised the rifle, aimed it dead center at the door. Who's there? Nothing. He stepped closer, the wood creaking beneath his feet. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. Another knock. This time from the back door. He spun around, the rifle trembling in his hands. "You stay out of my house." Silence again. Then, the faint click of a camera starting to record. It came from inside. Walter froze. Slowly turned toward the sound. The red light blinked from the corner of the room. One of his own cameras had turned itself on, but the lens wasn't pointing at the window. It was pointing at him. The feed on the laptop flickered back to life. On screen, Walter saw himself, framed perfectly in the shot, standing in the middle of the room, shaking, afraid. Behind him, barely visible in the grainy image, a tall shadow leaned out of the darkness near the hallway. Walter spun around. Nothing. He looked back at the screen. The shadow was closer now. His breath hitched. He raised the rifle, yelling, "Stay back!" The light on the camera blinked faster, recording. Then everything went black. No sound. No power. No light. Only the red blink, steady now, pulsing like a heartbeat. And faintly, from somewhere behind the walls, a voice whispered, slow, hoarse, like it hadn't spoken in decades. "Now, you're one of us." The red light blinked once more, then stopped. The night had barely begun to fade when Walter's porch light flickered, once, twice, and died. He stood there in the cold dark, flashlight trembling in his hand, staring into the woods that had haunted him for months. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was too still, like the air itself was holding its breath. He muttered to himself, "All right then, if you're real, let's finish this." The beam of his flashlight sliced through the mist as he stepped past the tree line. The earth crunched beneath his boots, frost cracking, twigs snapping. He could feel his pulse thudding in his ears, heavy and slow. He wasn't rushing. No, this was deliberate. Every step, measured. Every sound, recorded in his head. Walter walked until the world swallowed him, the woods closing in like a throat. That's when he noticed it again. The hum, low, pulsing, mechanical. Not like an animal at all. It vibrated through the soil, climbed his legs, reached his spine. He followed it down a slope, his breath fogging in the air. Then he saw it. Half buried in the frozen dirt, behind a veil of roots and branches, stood something metallic. A jagged, rusted structure like an old well, or maybe something older. It was surrounded by broken trees. The bark splintered outward like something came out, not went in. His camera blinked red. Recording. Walter took a cautious step forward. The air smelled burnt, like ozone after a storm. His flashlight stuttered again, and for a moment he caught a glimpse. Movement inside the hollow. Something twisting. Thin, almost skeletal. Not human, not animal. Just wrong. He whispered, "Dear God." Then came the voices, not from behind him, not from the trees, but from the recorder hanging at his chest. Static, then his own voice playing back, hours old. "If you're real, let's finish this." It repeated, warped, slowed down, until it wasn't his voice anymore. He froze. The air rippled. From the hollow, a hand, pale, long, stretched like the skin had been dragged too far, slid out, pressing against the rim. It wasn't reaching for him. It was feeling the air, trembling like it was afraid of the world it had left. Walter stumbled back, heart hammering. The camera shook violently as he tried to focus. And then he saw the face, or what used to be one. It wasn't a creature from the woods. It was human. Or it had been. Its face looked melted into something else. Its eyes, faintly glowing, darted toward the lens. Then another figure stepped behind it, and another, shapes half seen but familiar. 3 of them. The missing hikers, the same ones the town had searched for last winter. The same ones whose pictures still hung on the notice board outside the diner. Walter's hand trembled as he whispered, "You're still alive." One of the shapes tilted its head. Slow, deliberate. The hum intensified, rising to a sharp pitch that clawed into his ears. The camera light flared white, and the world went black. Ellipsis. When the footage resurfaced 3 days later, nobody knew who uploaded it. Just a 12-minute video titled, "What Lives in the Woods Behind My House." The footage is unbelievable. It showed Walter's last walk into the woods, the humming sound, the metal hollow, and finally, the faces. But what made people lose sleep wasn't what they saw, it was what came after. In the last frame, barely visible in the corner of the screen, was Walter's reflection in the lens. Only his face wasn't his anymore. It had that same stretched, hollow look. Locals still whisper about it at the diner, lowering their voices whenever someone new walks in. "He was too curious," one of them says. "That thing, it changed him," another mutters. "Nah," an old mechanic adds, shaking his head. "He didn't find it. It found him." And when the night fog rolls in from the trees, they say you can still hear the faint hum coming from the woods, low, steady, mechanical, and somewhere in the distance, the soft static of a recorder turning on by itself. They say the police found Walter's camera 2 days later, still recording, buried in the dirt, facing the trees. No trace of him. No sign of struggle. Just the faint sound of breathing, deep in the background. So here's the question. If something out there can wear your voice, your face, your memories, how would you ever know it isn't already inside your house? What do you think Walter really saw in those woods?